Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to PyeongChang Peace Forum session on peace in Asia, Africa, particularly Myanmar and Ethiopia. This is partner session 11. My name is Anselmo Lee. I'm the moderator of this session and regional coordinator of APSD, Asia Civil Society Partnership for Sustainable Development. This session is organized in partnership with Asia Africa Platform, as well as APSD. As you know, we have several speakers, as you've seen in the program. So we have two speakers, respectively, about Myanmar and Ethiopia. Then we will have two discussants from Asia, from Africa, to address issue of the Myanmar and Ethiopia. So this session is to address the current threats and challenges to peace in two particular countries. We pick up this country, so-called hotspot, the current ongoing issues, particularly in Asia and Africa. Of course, yesterday there was another big issue, Ukraine. Probably we'll address Ukraine the next session. But today we pick up these two issues because Myanmar, as you know, already more than 1 year, struggle still going on. And this time particularly, as you know, this is organized in a hybrid manner. That means those who are in Korea attend in person. So I am with a very special person in South Korea. He's the only speaker in this room about Myanmar because he's living and working in South Korea. So I will introduce more in detail. So this session is not simply the two countries. We pick up these two countries as a way to build international, more specifically intercontinental dialogue and solidarity between Asia, Africa, which is very rare, you know. Usually whenever discuss international conflict, we have to work with the Europe and United States or the North America. But this time, this called South-South dialogue or South-South cooperation. So in that sense, although it's very small, we want to continue this type of dialogue and solidarity between Asia, Africa, hopefully also between Asia and Latin America as well. So without further ado, let me introduce the first speaker. It's Yan Naing Thun, NUG, the National Unity Government representative to South Korea. I think this is the first country, South Korea, right, that opened your office. That's why it's very significant. And his presence in PyeongChang Peace Forum is very, very significant because yesterday, the UN Secretary General mentioned about PyeongChang peace spirit. So big challenge is how we can apply this PyeongChang peace spirit in the case of Myanmar, you know, and also Ethiopia, you know. That's why we invited these two countries. So without further ado, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about what is the NUG and your activities before you present your cases. Okay, now you have about 15 minutes, and then we have he will speak Burmese language, right? And then there will be a translation, Korean and the English simultaneously. Yes, please. You have 15 minutes.
Hello. အားလုံးပဲမင်္ဂလာပါခင်ဗျာကျွန်တော်ကတော့ပြည်ထောင်စုသမ္မတမြန်မာနိုင်ငံတော်မြို့သားညီညွတ်ရေးအစိုးရရဲ့ကိုရီးယားနိုင်ငံဆိုင်ရာမြန်မာကိုယ်စားလှယ်ဖြစ်တာဝန်ပေးရခြင်းကိုခံထားရတဲ့ရန်နိုင်ထုံးပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်အခုလိုဒီဖြောင်းချမ်းဒီညီလာခံနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တွေ့ဆုံဆွေးနွေးပွဲမှာကျွန်တော်အနေနဲ့အခုလိုစာတမ်းတစ်ခုကိုတင်ပြရတဲ့အတွက်ကျေးဇူးအများကြီးတင်ပါတယ်ကျွန်တော်တင်ပြမယ့်စာတမ်းကတော့ယနေ့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့အခြေအနေနဲ့နိုင်ငံတကာတို့၏အခမ်းကဏ္ဍဆိုတဲ့အမည်ရှိတဲ့စာတမ်းတစ်ခုကိုကျွန်တော်ဖတ်ကြားတင်သွင်းမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ
네, 저는 NUG 한국 대표부 양난통 특사입니다.
And I'm the NUG Special Envoy to Korea. Today I will be talking about the Myanmar coup and the international coalition.
အခြေအနေတွေကိုပေါင်းစပ်ထားတဲ့နိုင်ငံတစ်ခုဖြစ်ပါတယ်။နိုင်ငံရေးပြဿနာပေါင်းများစွာကိုရင်ဆိုင်နေရတဲ့အခြေအနေဖြစ်သောကြောင့်ယနေ့အထိကမ္ဘာအလယ်မှာအဆင်းရဲဆုံးနိုင်ငံနဲ့ဖွံ့ဖြိုးမှုအနည်းဆုံးနိုင်ငံဖြစ်ဒီမှာယနေ့ဒီငြိမ်းချမ်းညီလာခံကိုတက်ရောက်လာကြတဲ့လူကြီးမင်းများအားလုံးအသိပဲဖြစ်ပါလိမ့်မယ်။ဒီလိုပြဿနာများစွာတွေကနေပြီးတော့လူမျိုးရေးကြားပြဿနာအာဏာသိမ်းမှုပြဿနာနဲ့ဖွဲ့စည်းပုံပြဿနာများသည်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံကိုငြိမ်းချမ်းခြင်းဆိုတဲ့အိမ်ကနေဆွဲထုတ်ကာ ပြဿနာများနေပြည့်စုံနေသောငရေပုံကိုပို့နေသောအကြောင်းတရားများပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့နိုင်ငံရေးပြဿနာတွေမှာပြဿနာအရင်းမြစ်၃ချက်ကိုပုံတစ်ပါဖော်ပြချက်များအတိုင်းခွဲခြားလေ့လာနိုင်ပါတယ်
네, 미얀마는 다양한 민족
Myanmar is composed of various ethnic groups. It's based on diversity. As you all know, those who are participating in the PyeongChang Peace Forum, because of political issues up till this day, is the most poor country in the world. There are many different challenges, but among them, Myanmar is faced with ethnic conflict and race conflict and the military coup. And these leads to internal conflicts. And you can find the challenges of Myanmar on the slide here.
တချို့သောပညာရှင်များက Federal Democracy ကိုအခြေခံသောပင်လိုစာချုပ်ကိုစန့်ကျင်ကဝန်ကြီးချုပ်ဦးနုနှင့်ရှေ့နေဦးချန်ထွန်းတို့မှ1948ခုစက်တင်ဘာလမှာရေးဆွဲခဲ့သောဖွဲ့စည်းပုံကနေအစပြုသည်တခြားသောပညာရှင်များကတော့ပြည်ထလက်ထက်အစိုးရ policy ကြောင့်ဖြစ်တယ်လို့မှတ်ချက်ချကြပါတယ်
첫째는 인종 문제가
First of all, there is the issue of ethnicity. Many academics believe that this started from 1947. There was opposition against the Pyongyang Agreement, and others believe that the conflict begins with the British administration policy of divide and rule.
အာဏာသိမ်းမှုပြဿနာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဖွဲ့စည်းပုံကြောင့်လူမျိုးကြားတန်းတူအခွင့်အရေးမတူညီမျှမှုကြောင့်လွတ်လပ်ရပြီးတဲ့နောက်ပိုင်းမှာကျွန်တော်တို့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံကပြည်တွင်းစစ်ဖွဲ့စည်းပုံပြဿနာများစွာနဲ့ကြုံတွေ့ရင်ဆိုင်ခဲ့ရပါတယ်ထိုကဲ့သို့သောပြဿနာများကိုဖြေရှင်းရန်အတွက်ပါတီတွင်တွစ်ဆုံမှုလူမျိုးကြားဆွေးနွေးမှုများရှိသောညာလည်းပဲ1992ခုနှစ်မတ်လ2ရက်နေ့တွင် Federal Democracy သည်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံကိုဖျက်ဆီးလိမ့်မည်ဟုဂျပန်စစ်တင်တန်းထွက်စစ်တပ်ခေါင်းဆောင်ဗိုလ်ချုပ်နေဝင်းမှနိုင်ငံတော်အာဏာကိုသိမ်းယူလိုက်ပါတယ်1962ခုနှစ်ကနေ2021ခုနှစ်အထိအာဏာသိမ်းမှုပေါင်း3ကြိမ်တိတိဖြစ်ခဲ့ပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ
둘째, 반복되는
Number two, there has been repetitive military coup. Now, because of the constitution itself, there has been many structural issues and internal conflict. And in order to resolve these issues, we have made efforts, but in 1962, there has been another military coup. And starting from 1962 until 2021, there has been 3 military coups.
ယနေ့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံကဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ဗိုလ်ချုပ်အောင်ဆန်းနဲ့ပြည်တော်စုလူမျိုးများကချုပ်ဆိုထားသောပင်လုံစာချုပ်ကိုအခြေခံပြီးပေါ်ပေါက်လာခဲ့သောနိုင်ငံတော်ဖြစ်ပါတယ်1948ခုဖွဲ့စည်းပုံသည်ဝန်ကြီးချုပ်ဦးနုနှင့်ရှေ့နေဦးချန်ထွန်းမှ United Resident ရေးဆွဲထားသောကြောင့်လူမျိုးကြားပါတီကြားဘာသာရေးကြားပြဿနာများကိုဖြစ်စေခဲ့ပါတယ်1948ခုဖွဲ့စည်းပုံနဲ့2008ဖွဲ့စည်းပုံမှာစစ်တပ်ကသူတို့စိတ်ကြိုက်ရေးဆွဲထားသောဖွဲ့စည်းပုံဖြစ်သောကြောင့်လူတဘာဝဒီမိုကရေစီစံချိန်စံညွှန်းနဲ့စန့်ကျင်ကလူမျိုးကြားပြဿနာတယံဇာတခွဲမှုဆိုင်ရာပြဿနာနိုင်ငံရေးပြဿနာဤကဲ့သို့သောပြဿနာပေါင်းများစွာကိုဖြစ်ပေါ်စေခဲ့ပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ
세 번째는 헌법의 문제입니다.
Number three, there is the constitution problem. In Myanmar, there has been a number of leaders, and they signed the Finlaw Agreement, but after the 1947 Constitution, a single country was established, but there were religious and ethnic issues arising. And then in 1974, the Constitution and the 2008 Constitution was established in accordance to the wishes of the military. And also there were many different issues, for example, political issues that is being experienced in Myanmar.
မြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့လက်ရှိအခြေအနေကိုကျွန်တော်ဆက်လက်တင်ပြပါမယ်2021ခုနှစ်ဇန်နဝါရီလ1ရက်နေ့တွင်မင်းအောင်လှိုင်ဦးဆောင်သောစစ်တပ်သည်2020ခုနှစ်နိုဝင်ဘာလ10ရက်နေ့တွင်ကျင်းပသောအထွေထွေရွေးကောက်ပွဲမှာမဲမသမာမှုများရှိကြောင်းအကြောင်းပြကာအာဏာသိမ်းမှုတစ်ရပ်ကိုပြုလုပ်ခဲ့ပါတယ်
2021년 1월 1일에 매아웃라인이
On January 1st, 2022,
부정선거라는 이유로
there was another coup that took place, calling for the general elections being rigged.
ငင်းညမ်းစွာနဲ့လမ်းမပေါ်ထွက်ပြီးဆန္ဒပြသကြတော်ညာလည်းပဲ2021ခုနှစ်မတ်လနောက်ပိုင်းတွင်အာဏာသိမ်းစစ်တပ်၏အကြမ်းဖက်ဖြိုခွဲမှုကြောင့်တချို့သောပြည်သူများသည်တိရစ္ဆာန်ပမာရက်ဆက်စွာအသက်ခံခဲ့ရပါတယ်
구리미와 같이 쿠데타를
As you can see in this diagram, for the military coup, there were many citizens who came out to the street. However, because of the military coup, many people were killed.
ကျန်းဖက်မင်းအောင်လှိုင်နဲ့သွေးစစ်တပ်လောက်ရကြောက်အပြစ်မဲ့ပြည်သူ1500ဦးတူးကျော်တည်ဆုံးခဲ့ရပြီး52ဦးမှာအရှင်လက်လက်မီးရှို့ခြင်းကိုခံခဲ့ရပါတယ်82ဦးဒီလေတေတံအပြစ်ပေးခံနေရပါတယ်ယနေ့အထိထောင်ဒဏ်ကြခံရသူစုပေါင်းမှာ1966ဦးကျော်ဖြစ်ပြီးတော့အဖမ်းခံရသူပေါင်းမှာလေ8902ဦးကျော်ရှိခဲ့ပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ
네, 테러리스트 메어라인과 그게
And the military government has killed more than around 1,500 people. The people burned to death by junta is around 52, and there has been 80 sentenced to death. And there are more than 8,000 people who are under detention. Over 600 has been sentenced.
John F. Kennedy တော်လန်ရေးမှတ်ချက်စကားပုံဖြစ်သည့်အကြမ်းမဖက်တော်လန်ရေးသည်လုံးဖြစ်တော်သောအခါပြည်သူများသည်အကြမ်းဖက်တဲ့နည်းဖြင့်တော်လန်ရေးလမ်းစဉ်ကိုမလွဲမသာရွေးချယ်ခဲ့ရကြသည်ဆိုသောစကားအတိုင်းလက်နက်ကင်တော်လန်ရေးကိုဆင်နွှဲခဲ့ကြပါသည်ဒီလိုမျိုးအခြေအနေပြောင်းလဲမှုကြောင့်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံတွင်ဖော်ပြပါပုံသုံးအတိုင်းတိုက်ပွဲများတိုးပွားကအကြမ်းဖက်စစ်တပ်မှမိရှုခံရမှုပြည်သူများတည်ဆုံမှုတို့တွင်အစမတန်တိုးပွားလာပါတယ်ဒီလိုမျိုးအသက်တင်အန္တရာယ်စိုးရိမ်ရသောအခြေအနေများကြောင့်သတင်းသမားများသည်သတင်းယူမှုအားနည်းစေပြီးဒီနေ့လက်ရှိမြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့အခြေအနေသည်တကယ်ဖြစ်တာလောက်ကမ္ဘာအလယ်ကိုမချပြနိုင်သောအခြေအနေမျိုးတွေလည်းရှိနေပါသည်
군부의 유혈 탄압 이후 미얀마
The
국민들을
military junta has been oppressing the people, and when there is non-violent protests, well, through non-violent protests, the people want to achieve freedom and democracy again. Now, because of the military junta, there has been many people negatively affected, and also the number of internally displaced people and deaths have increased by more than twofolds. And also the situation has worsened because of the media reports, and the current situation in Myanmar actually is not well known around the world.
တိုင်းရင်းသားလက်နက်ကိုင်အဖွဲ့အစည်းများအကြတိုက်ပွဲမင်းအောင်လှိုင်စစ်တပ်နှင့်ဒေသကာကွယ်ရေးတပ်များအကြတိုက်ပွဲနှင့်တိုင်းရင်းသားလက်နက်ကိုင်ချင်းချင်းတိုက်ပွဲများဟု၍အမျိုးအစား၃မျိုးခွဲခြားပြီးဖြစ်ပွားလျက်ရှိသည့်အချို့သောတော်လှန်တိုင်းရင်းသားလက်နက်ကိုင်အဖွဲ့အစည်းများနှင့်ဒေသကာကွယ်ရေးတပ်များ၏အာဏာသိမ်းမှုနှင့်ပြည်သူများအကြမ်းဖက်မှုကိုစန့်ကျင်သောတိုက်ပွဲဝင်နေကြခြင်းသာဖြစ်ပါသည်2021ခုနှစ်ဇူလိုင်လ1ရက်နေ့မှဒီဇင်ဘာလ16ရက်နေ့အတွင်းအများဆုံးတိုက်ပွဲများမှာတိုင်းရင်းသားလက်နက်ကိုင် EAO နှင့်အကြမ်းဖက်စစ်ကောင်စီများအကြတိုက်ပွဲအကြိမ်ပေါင်း1159ကြိမ်ဒုတိယအများဆုံးတိုက်ပွဲမှာဒေသခံကာကွယ်ရေးတပ်ဖွဲ့များ PDF CDF LDF KNDF နှင့်အကြမ်းဖက်စစ်ကောင်စီများအကြားတိုက်ပွဲပေါင်း336ကြိမ်နဲ့တိုင်းရင်းသားလက်နက်ကိုင်များအချင်းချင်းအကြားတိုက်ပွဲရှမ်းပြည်တိုးတက်ရေးပါတီနှင့်ရှမ်းပြည်ပြည်နယ်ထူထောင်ရေးကောင်စီအကြားတိုက်ပွဲပေါင်း16ကြိမ်တိတိရှိခဲ့ပါတယ်
현재 미얀마에서
At present in Myanmar, there has been clashes between the SAC, the EAOs, and the local defense forces. So there are three different types of clashes, as you can see here. Now, some of the EAOs and the LDFs are working together to fight against the military. And so you can see that from July 1st to December 18th of 2021, these are the clashes that have been taking place. And there were 1,179 clashes, and there has been 336 clashes between the defense forces.
မိမိတို့ရဲ့အင်အားများကိုစွန့်ခွာခဲ့ရပါတယ်စစ်ပြေးဒုက္ခတွေတိုးပွားနှုန်းကိုကြည့်မယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်အာဏာသိမ်းမှုဖြစ်ပွားပြီးမှ2021ခုနှစ်ဒီဇင်ဘာလ18ရက်နေ့အထိကယားပြည်နယ်တွင်အများဆုံးဖြစ်ပါတယ်စကိုင်းပြည်နယ်တွင်လည်းဖြစ်ခဲ့ပါတယ်ကရင်ပြည်နယ်နဲ့ချင်းပြည်နယ်များတွင်လည်းရှမ်းပြည်နယ်များနဲ့မကွေးတိုင်းကချင်ပြည်နယ်အေရဝတီတိုင်းနဲ့တနင်္လာရီတိုင်းတို့တွင်လည်းစုစုပေါင်း4သိန်းနီးပါးရှိခဲ့ပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာရခိုင်ရှိခဲ့သောဘင်္ဂလားဒေ့ရှ်နဲ့ထိုင်းနိုင်ငံရှိဒုက္ခသည်အရေးအတွက်9,900,000 ကျော်နဲ့စုစုပေါင်း17သိန်းကျော်နီးပါးဟာစစ်ဘေးဒုက္ခသည်ကြောင့်တိမ်းရှောင်နေရတဲ့အခြေအနေမျိုးကိုရောက်ရှိခဲ့ပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ
The violence and conflict because of the military has increasing, and there has been people who has been displaced. You can see that the internally displaced people has been growing in number, And so, as you can see here, the more than 100,000 people in the Kaya people have been displaced, and also 60,000 more than in Kaya. And in Sanju, 3,400 has been displaced, and in Kachin, more than 12,000 people have been displaced, and also in Tanindai, 1,500 people or more have been displaced. So in total, about 400,000 people have been displaced in Myanmar. And also Bangladesh and Thailand in the border area, there has been more than 900,000 displaced people. And there is more than 1.8 people in total up till now who have been displaced. And there has been continuous violence against the civilians, and they are committing crimes continuously.
Social media boarding Pizzi, Yodan the Nizam Yuma Pizzi, Jajabian Piloke Jabari. A chamber Sidney, Mudan Sua Jama, Democracy in Azu Nangamia, Kulatomaga, ASEAN Gedo, Pozimia Male, a chamber settled letter, Mudan Nuego, Pomo Abiga, the morning a pedanago, Pishaga, Pishi and Taitumia, Piloke Jabari. Dudole, the morning at Dumamu, a Poga Pogaga Lumu, a chamber Sitago, Pidu Miaga, a chamber Mumia, she told me as a pillow like a dojo. The Mabi Dumiadi, Kuni Mezoa, Kavalu Damia, eat target in Kanaya Dumiala, the native the knee, Meola, Sita, Tapiamuguda, Kanzani Yabari. Igeto do, Chili Miajo, the morning and the morning and Damiadi, Naroda Shizu Sojaga, Goba in Kago Kungu, Dombuga, Sita, Jamu Dango, Kugan Kago Lea Shigebai.
The international community on February 1st, 2022, condemned the junta for its attacks and terrorism, and this was reported through the SNS. Many international organizations, including the UN and ASEAN, has been calling for the political resolution of this situation. However, the junta continues to engage in more violence, and currently Myanmar is in a difficult situation. Amid such backdrop, the Myanmar people say that they exist for themselves and they are fighting against and protecting themselves from the junta.
Dodole, Pamamu, a Jampamugu, Jetan, Nine Lao, the child of Mabidu Miagu, getting Nine Lao, Loya Miagu, Jakwa Kevari.
The U.S. government has been strongly supporting the democracy of Myanmar, and for the democracy movement, the U.S. said that it will cooperate. The Biden administration for the democracy of the Myanmar is supporting Myanmar. It has established the NDAA for the recovery of democracy, and there are sanctions implemented, but to stop the violence, the U.S. action has failed.
The morning and dream, democracy Pialet, Ting the Yego, Select Tokambi, the morning a Simbian Soya Pido, a Mudan in Soya, and Eugene, T2 Sassan Donny Pijang, Tongoria Soyaga, Dojagebari. Korea Lotto Mamagale, the more democracy, Pialet Tudor Fuego, Lotto Mam, Chisang out of Posigabi, the morning a Chinigo, a Chinese Galizo, the Nza Shinimia, Saran, Totally a Shibi, Kanko Shocha Mugu, Piloli a Shibari, Dodole, the Pamamu, Korea Soyadi. The Mabidu Miago, a chain, Tapiamu, Julonedu, Mayon Sidane, Siwayori, Select Losoni Jaraule, to know Pishiabari. To the bin, Posco, Go Gas, Ena Grune, Korea Community, Setane Siwayo Piloga, Setting with Jamiao, Topan Nedigo Pishiabari. A Sozoma, the morning as she, Tangoria Tayodi, Sekonzi Yashimiani, Samsung, LG, Sashi, Longagomari, about when. Tongoria Comuniaja, a semi Sunni Womiago, Naton as a Kunin, Wimalarin, Jimba Pigabari. Igedo, Chinimiaja, Korea Soya Luyadi, Piatamu Mashidio, General Pishiabari.
한국 정부는
The Korean government has been working closely with the international community and also has been working closely with the NUG to restore democracy in Myanmar and announced that it will continue to work with NUG for the restoration of democracy in Myanmar. For the peace and democracy of Myanmar, there is a National Assembly representatives gathering. And there was a press conference and a statement released denouncing the coup. Meanwhile, the Korean government said that it will not work economically with the junta, especially POSCO and KOGAS and the Inno Group, these Korean corporations has been revealed to have funded or worked with the junta. And in December, the Myanmar embassy in Korea held meetings with Korean companies such as Samsung and LG. There was a high-level meeting with these companies, and during that time, however, the Korean government's position or action is obscure.
Energy သည်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံအတွင်းယင်းနှိမ့်မြုပ်နှံမှုများကိုရပ်ဆိုင်းကာမြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာပြန်လည်ထွက်ခွာသွားမည်ဟု2022ခုနှစ်ဇန်နဝါရီလ21ရက်နေ့တွင်ကြေညာခဲ့ပါတယ်။ Total ကုမ္ပဏီရတနာသဘာဝတံငွေလောက်ကွက်သည်စစ်တပ်အာဏာသိမ်းပြီးနောက်ပိုင်းတစ်နှစ်အတွင်းစစ်တပ်အတွက်ခွန်ငွေအမေရိကန်ဒေါ်လာ1ဘီလီယံခွဲခန့်ပေးဆောင်ခဲ့ရပါတယ်။ Total သည်1992ခုနှစ်မှစတင်ပြီးမြန်မာနိုင်ငံတွင်နှစ်ပေါင်း30နီးပါးယင်းနှိမ့်မြုပ်နှံမှုများကိုပြုလုပ်ခဲ့သောကုမ္ပဏီဖြစ်ပါတယ်။
유럽의 간대국인 프랑스.
The French government is against the junta, and at the Senate there was a decision made to support the NUG. Total Energy, which is a gas corporation, in 2020, on January 22nd, stopped investment in Myanmar and said that it will leave Myanmar. Total's gas business had given tax revenue of a considerable amount for the past 2 years to the junta.
ဥရောပသမဂ္ဂ EU ကဥရောပပါလီမန်အစည်းအဝေးမှာအာဏာသိမ်းစစ်တပ်၏လုပ်ရက်သည်တရားမဝင်ကြောင်းနှင့်အမျိုးသားညီညွတ်ရေးအစိုးရ NUG နှင့်ပြည်ထောင်စုလွှတ်တော်ကိုစားပြုကော်မတီ CRPH တို့သာလျှင်ဒီမိုကရေစီနည်းကျရွေးချယ်တင်မြှောက်ခြင်းခံထားရသောဖွဲ့စည်းများဖြစ်တယ်လို့ဖော်ပြထားပါတယ်
유로연합.
The EU at the EU Council said that the NUG is the democratically acknowledgeable authority in Myanmar.
ဒီလိုချမ်းသာမှုလုပ်ဆောင်မှုသည်မင်းအောင်လှိုင်ကအာဆီယံနဲ့တဘောတူထားသောအချက်၅ချက်ကိုလိုက်နာရန်ပြုတ်ခွက်သောကြောင့်ဖြစ်ပါတယ်။တစ်ဖက်မှာမင်းအောင်လှိုင်ကိုအာဆီယံခေါင်းဆောင်ဆွဲသွင်းရင်အာဆီယံအဖွဲ့အစည်းပါပျက်စီးနိုင်မည်ဟုသုံးသက်ချက်များကိုပေါ်ထွက်လာပါသေးတယ်။အကြောင်းကတော့အာဆီယံအဖွဲ့အစည်းများကြားတွင်မင်းအောင်လှိုင်ကိုလုံးဝမထောက်ခံသူတွေရှိနေသောကြောင့်ဖြစ်ပါတယ်။
The ASEAN up till now, during the ASEAN summit, is not allowing the junta representative to the ASEAN meetings. That is because the Senior General Min Aung Hlaing did not follow the agreement of ASEAN 5 points, was the consensus. And there are views that if the presence of the junta is allowed, then the ASEAN structure would go down.
ကျွန်တော်ဒီကုန်းချုပ်အနေနဲ့တင်ပြရမယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံသည်အထက်ဖော်ပြခဲ့သောမျိုးအကြမ်းဖက်နည်းများမျိုးစုံကိုခံစားရနေရသောနိုင်ငံချင်းဒီမှာဖြစ်နေပါတယ်ပြည်သူများသည်ကိုဗစ်နှင့်အကြမ်းဖက်မှုများကြားမှာအသက်အန္တရာယ်ရှိကာအသက်ရှင်လျက်နေထိုင်ကြရသောနိုင်ငံတကာကအကူအညီများစွာလိုအပ်လျက်ရှိပါတယ်
네, 결론을 얘기해 보겠습니다.
So let me go on to conclude. Myanmar, as it was explained, is experiencing the pain of pressure, violence, and we are amidst the risk of COVID-19 and violence, and that is why we need the help of the international community.
တိကျမှုမရှိသည်ကိုကျွန်တော်တို့တွေ့ရှိနေရပါတယ်ဒီထက်တိကျမှုရှိသောလှုပ်ရှားမှုစီးပွားရေးပိတ်ဆို့မှုတွေဒီထက်ပိုပြီးပြုလုပ်ရန်လိုအပ်နေပါတယ်အပြောမဟုတ်သောလှုပ်ရှားမှုသည်ကိုရီးယားအစိုးရများကြားတွင်လည်းပြုလုပ်ရန်လိုအပ်ပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ
군사 쿠데타에 대한 구체적인
In terms of the coup, there has to be a more clear action and sanction by the international community, and the South Korean government should take substantial measures.
နိုင်ငံရေးပြဿနာများကိုဖြေရှင်းရန်ကြိုးစားမှုတိုင်းသည်ဆက်အာဏာသိမ်းမှုကြောင့်ဖျက်ဆီးစေခဲ့ရပါတယ်။ထို့ကြောင့်အာဏာသိမ်းမှုဆက်နွယ်သည့်အကြမ်းမှုများအဆုံးသတ်နိုင်ရေးသည်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့ငြိမ်းချမ်းရေးနှင့်ဖက်ဒရယ်ဒီမိုကရေစီရေးအတွက်အဓိကလိုအပ်သောအချက်လက်ဖြစ်ကြောင်းပြောကြားတင်ကြားခဲ့ရပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ။
미얀마의 정치적 문제로
The political issue of Myanmar has to be resolved, but the efforts have been made void because of the military coup. So the violence of the military coup has to come to an end, and that is required for the peace and democracy of Myanmar.
ကျေးဇူးအထူးတင်ရှိပါတယ်ကိုရီးယားအစိုးရအနေနဲ့ကျွန်တော်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံအကျိုးအတွက်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံဒီမိုကရေစီလမ်းကြောင်းပေါ်ကိုပြန်လည်ရောက်ရှိနိုင်စေရေးအတွက်ဆက်လက်တပူကူညီအားပေးနိုင်ကြပါစေလို့ကျွန်တော်ဆုတောင်းပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your attention.
대한민국 미얀마 연방공화국 대표.
I am with the Korean representative of Myanmar. Thank you.
For your very concise presentation about current situation and also international response, UN and ASEAN, particularly South Korea, which is a host of the Energy Office. Now let's go to Ethiopia. Then we will invite the panels about Myanmar and Ethiopia, because this is an important opportunity to learn from each other. So we will make a two presentation and then we have a mixed discussion. Okay, now let's go to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, very far away from Far East. We are in Far East. And now we go to Africa. So let me invite Dr. Solomon Billay Faris. He's a Baha'i International Community Office in Addis Ababa. You have about 15 minutes for presentation.
All right, good morning. Can you see my slides?
PowerPoint?
My PowerPoint, is it visible?
Yep.
Yes, it
now
is.
it's okay.
All right. So my presentation focuses on political crisis and conflict in Africa or slash Ethiopia, because almost every conflict in Africa is caused by very similar causes, and I'm just focusing causes of conflict in Africa. Of course, sometimes giving citing examples from Ethiopia and other African countries. And of course, as mentioned earlier, ultimately the objective is to address the current threats and challenges to peace in Africa in order to build international solidarity among peoples and citizens, as suggested by Mr. Anselmo earlier. So I will not be focusing on the manifestations of the conflict. I'll just focus on the conflict, the causes of conflict, and going forward, what can we do, both as a continent, as a country, or in intercontinental solidarity. So, as suggested by the organizers, I will be talking very briefly on the three causes: immediate causes, underlying causes, and structural causes. And finally, of course, I will overview the response of people and citizens, and then how shall we address the challenge. In fact, in 2022, the very current information by ISS Africa, Institute for Security Studies in Africa, a well-known international organizations, shows that Libya, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Northern Mozambique, Ethiopia, Cameroon, both northwest and the southwest, are the 6 African conflict hotbeds, you know. So, and the causes are also very, very similar. In fact, conflict trends in Africa, which was released in 2020, divides or defines conflict in 4 items. You know, state-based conflict, you know, where the state is involved; non-state conflict, where non-state actors are involved, and of course you cannot just call everything conflict. So that's why they give a particular definition of what conflict is, what qualifies as a conflict. And when one-sided violence, where, you know, any force, whether the government or civilian force, attacks a particular group, and also, of course, then battle deaths caused by these warring parties. And also, the current Ethiopian Peace Observatory is a local organization which maps the conflicts in Ethiopia, and of course organizes a database, shows the spread of conflict like this. The brown ones, the key shows, the brown ones are the conflicts now in Ethiopia. So based on the definition given above, almost we can say, even though the conflicts are more concentrated on the northern side of Ethiopia, there are violence across Ethiopia. Of course, the immediate ones are reforms. Either there are coups in Africa, or reformers arise, and or maybe people may not accept for elections, formal elections. So the reforms in Africa, including Ethiopia itself, had challenges. Some of the challenges are, for example, there were no capable individuals and institutions that can manage the reform. And also, because already capable people have left the country, capable, educated people have left the continent, including Ethiopia, there is an efficient bureaucracy. And in fact, as I mentioned earlier, there are no capable, not only institutions, but individuals who can sustain the reform, who can also direct it into the right direction. And the power distribution already between the center and the region, or among regions, or among ethnic groups, were already imbalanced. What happens is, what happened in Ethiopia or in even other African countries, the center becomes weaker, while the regions and the local governments become more and more stronger. So the central government lost control in the case of Ethiopian situation, and there was also central government incoherence because of the recent history of ethnic the divisions along ethnic lines. Moreover, what we call, there is this tragedy of the commons, a very old a very old philosophy, where a group of people hijack a certain cause. So we can say the reforms in Africa, including Ethiopia, are hijacked by certain groups. So when certain groups take supremacy or overtake the other groups, there is a lack of unity of vision. When there is lack of unity of vision, there is lack of unity of action, for sure. So there are contending groups and the social forces attacking each other, whether verbally or, of course, they just raise arms. The other very important cause of division and conflict now in Ethiopia is ethnic division, as was mentioned by our brother from Myanmar. This ethnic conflict, as opposed to ethnic diversity. Of course, Ethiopia is ethnically diverse country, including Africa. Thousands of tribes and ethnic groups exist in Africa, but a certain group, a power-mongering group, takes this occasion or opportunity to initiate one race group or ethnic group over the other, and that leads to a conflict. Or like Ethiopia itself is mapped along ethnic lines. The states are divided along ethnic lines, and this particular map itself was not well accepted by the whole population in Ethiopia, and still there are problems that arose even along the border lines within states or within regions. As another example, for example, in Africa, even South Sudan itself, it started with 2 regions. Now it has about 10 regions and 3 administrative areas, some of which is divided along ethnic lines, and that has, of course, one particular area would have that rich in resource, maybe oil or I don't know, gold, and then there is always that problem coming in the resource division and things like that. Another, with this, of course, when you divide a country along ethnic lines and along regions, there is no ontological agreement. Ontological means who we are as Africans, as Ethiopians. You know, how do we define ourselves? Now, one of the big problems now in the current discussion along in the media of Ethiopia is there is no, for example, agreement who we are as Ethiopians. We don't have agreement on history, a common history. There is no agreement on even the flag as a symbol of the country. These most African countries. So that's a problem itself. I think the conflict starts, as you know, war starts in the mind, and if in the mind of the people we're not sure, if people are not sure about who they are, and then of course it takes only some time until they take up arms and fight against each other. And because of this, also a lack of understanding of the who we are, and then there is no clear definition how we conceive justice, freedom, or equality. And also, even the opposition parties are always in fight against each other, whether individual liberty precedes over group liberty, or whether we take it together, or whether group freedom takes precedence over individual freedom. The other one, very important cause is also for conflict, is the institutional legacy, which means, you know, particularly the federal administration in Ethiopia has been very contested. You know, we have federal administration in Canada or in the US, but we don't see that creating conflict. First, it's not created along ethnic lines, and the federal, there is a balance between the regions and the center, and there is a clear regulations and policies to administer the federal government. But in Ethiopia or other African countries, this is in a way, even though indigenous wise we had history of federal administration, now it's mixed up with the current politics and is creating a problem. And always there is blending of state and the party. The party who is in power is almost assumes a state, a form of state, and there is confusion between always the blending of state and party. And all the security apparatus continues to work, which also hijacked the new reform. If we talk about underlying causes very quickly, of course, deep inside along all this, across this all causes of conflict is a lack of acknowledgement of the oneness of humanity. There's always this either superiority or inferiority complex, that one race or one ethnic group is superior than the other and deserves more, or the disaffected ethnic groups feels, you know, injustice is done, and so they rise up against other groups. That we have seen in Rwanda and other countries, in Cameroon and other countries. Of course, economic disparity, poverty is a major problem. You know, even politics or offices, political offices are taken as a means for promoting economy. That's a problem. Elections are rigged because people take power as a source of economy. And there is no middle class, actually, who can even sustain reforms and, of course, who can have the right offices. And, of course, always government is involved in... government is always involved, basically, in the owning of the economy. Injustice, there is always injustice. Very recently, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia itself admitted that the justice system in Ethiopia has almost collapsed, and justice is not being administered. As a very news to hear, even though people are experiencing it every day. And of course, the breakdown of cultural and spiritual ties because of all these conflicts. Now there is no any cultural and spiritual tie binding people together to raise this conflict. And for a long time, there was lack of quality education for the last 5 decades, 4 or 5 decades. In the name of access to education, quality was compromised. Now we have people with degrees and masters with no any real empowerment. So and with no jobs. So their only alternative is to take arms or to create a protest so that they can have something. Structural, ethnic federalism, power balance, as I mentioned earlier. Of course, lack of appropriate laws and policies and guidelines. And the way we appoint Ethiopia or other African countries appoint is political leaders, or even state governors. It's not based on merit. It is simply political affiliation. So when merit is undermined, you can imagine what happens. A response of people is initially it's confusion, because you don't know what's happening. You want to identify the causes, the way forward, and all this. So initially, it's always like what happened in Ethiopia. Individuals and CSOs couldn't come forward to address the recent conflict. In fact, there were division among themselves how to proceed, whether, for example, to support the government or to support, I don't know, the conflicting parties. And there was a very serious polarization. Whether you stand for peace or against peace, you are labeled, and so therefore no individual or no any meaningful group or say so could take any action within Ethiopia. Of course, things were too sensitive. And then, of course, later we'll find that there was a ceasefire agreement, either unilateral or bilateral ceasefire agreement. And there were pressures both inside and outside of the country to create peace agreement. And as you know, even though now not in Ethiopia, but in other African countries, there is a growth of peacekeeping operations. In 2010, almost 80,000 peacekeeping troops were deployed in Africa in 8 missions. That's generally a response of Africans to the African situation. Particularly in Ethiopian case, the diaspora was mobilized in diplomacy, in raising finance, and very recently, of course, 1 million diaspora homecoming was taken as a motive to bring so many diasporans to the country to show that peace is happening and the country is faring well. And also as a result, as you might have already heard, and many of my African friends know that there was a very ill-defined no more movement, no more for neo-colonialism, so it's a sort of calling African solidarity. But it is ill-defined, it's not, it doesn't seem to go anywhere. And Ethiopia has started Build Back Better because the conflict has, affected so many regions, localities. More than 5,000 schools were destroyed and hospitals, buildings collapsed. So now there is a Build Back Better initiative. Of course, going forward, I think as a regional, representing a regional office, I suggest we strengthen the existing structure, Pan-African structure. The African peace and security architecture should be strengthened. There is a panel of the wise, continental early warning system, African standby force, peacekeeping fund, peace fund. All these are, a very good opportunity for Africa, or even for Ethiopia, to take advantage of, and this should be strengthened. Outside the African Union, there are also other strong Pan-African organizations, peace and security think tanks, study groups. In West Africa, maybe in Ghana, Kwesi can tell us. There is this there are, so many initiatives everywhere. We need to also strengthen the regional economic communities, IGAD, NEPAD, on ECOWAS. These play a very important role in bringing peace to Africa or to the regions. Of course, there has to be always a balance between economic aid and human rights protection. As I mentioned earlier, the cultural and the moral ties have been broken. So we need to bring, the moral education back to school, the oneness of humanity, gender equality, independent investigation of truth. Fake news were sources of conflict, which I didn't mention. Because of lack of education, people even didn't know how to check information. Of course, the role of aid organization and UN organizations, which has been great, whether in funding the conflict or cooling the conflicts. I think that somehow has to be exploited in a positive way. Thank you so much. This is what I have for.
Okay, thank you very much, Solomon. Let's give a big hands to Solomon. Okay, with these two input, I'm sure already you have found some similarities and differences between the two countries. Seemingly, both are ethnic, multi-ethnic countries. Now they are facing armed conflict, whether we call civil war or not. People are severely affected. Many people are killed, day by day. And then, as he articulated, there are some immediate causes, underlying and structural. To build the long-term international solidarity, I think it's important to understand structural causes of the problem, so that international community knows how we can effectively support your campaign or movement. So we have invited 4 discussants. As I said, of course, the topic is given to you, Ethiopia or Myanmar. But at the end of your intervention, I'd like to ask you to mention about both countries. So your own, after listening to 2 presentations, I think it's important to build a common perspective, because it can be tomorrow another country, right? So today we are addressing Myanmar and Ethiopia. It can be anytime, any country. So I think it's build a more common international perspective so that we can build a broad-based coalition or campaign. Okay, let's go to first Myanmar. Let me invite Shamini Kaliumutu. She's the Executive Director of Forum Asia. It's an Asia-based human rights NGO coalition, which has been leading the campaign, international campaign among civil society organizations. Then I invite Kin Omar from Progressive Voice. She's from Myanmar, but she's now based in the United States. So Shamini, you have about 7 minutes for initial your intervention, please.
Thank you very much, Anselmo, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Greetings from Bangkok. Can I please ask the organizers to show the presentation, please? Thank you very much. Okay, so in the time that has been given to me, I will focus on a couple of key areas when it comes to our work on Myanmar. So I'll be focusing on international solidarity response, some ongoing challenges in the Myanmar situation, and also talking about international accountability and what the international community can do about this. And in between, I'll be weaving international solidarity throughout the different points that I will raise for you today. So first of all, the next slide, please. So first of all, when it comes to the international solidarity response, we have seen in our work that the courage and resilience of the Myanmar people has inspired support across Asia and the world. There is strong support for the civil disobedience movement, or the CDM, through online and offline solidarity campaigns. For example, and I'll give you 2 here, thousands of South Koreans joined an online relay campaign to express support. And second, a network called the Milk Tea Alliance supported Myanmar's anti-coup campaigners to call for global rallies. A mobilization invitation was welcomed by civil society, and online and offline protests were organized in cities like Taipei, Bangkok, Hong Kong, in Melbourne, in New York, and in many other cities as well. When it comes to underground funding networks, these emerged in support of the civil disobedience movement, especially among the diaspora community. The National Unity Government, represented here today by Ambassador Yan, successfully organized lottery and raffle tickets to raise funds for civil servants who went on strike to protest against the military. When it comes to the perspective of government actions, we heard from Ambassador Yan earlier about the US and sanctions that were introduced. Sanctions were also introduced by UK and Canada. And on the one-year anniversary of the attempted coup, the US, UK, and Canada imposed further sanctions on senior Myanmar officials to demonstrate the international community's strong support for the people of Myanmar and to further promote accountability for the coup and the violence perpetrated by the regime. A further example is in October last year, when the French Senate unanimously passed a resolution to formally recognize the NUG as the official government of Myanmar. 2 days later, on the 7th of October, the EU Parliament issued a resolution in support of CRPH and NUG, recognizing them as representatives of the people of Myanmar. Next slide, please. When it comes to ongoing challenges, we have found through our work and through our communications with our Myanmar members, including the diaspora community, that a sense of resentment and despair and a feeling of betrayal has risen among the Myanmar people towards the UN and the world community for doing little to help the country. We are at a point where statements and limited sanctions are not enough anymore. Since the start of the attempted coup, and Ambassador Yan had given you some figures, I'll add to this. We found that over 1,500 people have lost their lives, over 9,000 are still in detention. Rape and sexual assault is used as a weapon of war. Airstrikes on ethnic communities have caused death and displacement. And the continued crackdown on members of the civil disobedience movement and independent media continues. There is also a lack of accountability. And despite global scrutiny, the international community has fallen short to hold the military accountable for the Rohingya genocide and crimes against humanity committed against ethnic minorities. The Myanmar National Human Rights Commission, or the MNHRC, has not responded towards grave human rights violations in the country, has not demonstrated independence under the rule of the military junta, and this has failed the Myanmar citizens in promoting and protecting their rights. We've also found that after China, Myanmar is ranked as the world's second worst jailer of journalists, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, or CPJ, in a census that was released in December last year. There's also a lack of bold action to really address the crisis. The UN Security Council has done little to take concrete action, and some democracies around the world have fallen short on imposing sanctions as well. We've heard from Ambassador Yan earlier about ASEAN and its 5-point consensus. I'll elaborate on that a little later, but also as a little background. Instead of engaging ASEAN's former chair Brunei and current chair Cambodia, instead of engaging in dialogues with the NUG and ASEAN member states, the Cambodian Prime Minister chose to visit Min Aung Hlaing this past January as the ASEAN chairperson. And shortly after Hun Sen's visit, Cambodia postponed the first ASEAN foreign ministers meeting scheduled for the same month. And now we know that Cambodia is inviting a non-political representative to join the meeting, perhaps also as a result of backlash. Next slide, please. I'll focus now on international solidarity. The way forward includes support for those who are fleeing. Neighboring countries, Myanmar's neighboring countries, should safeguard and support those fleeing the country by ensuring secure border crossings, providing humanitarian assistance, as well as opening channels where humanitarian assistance is able to pass through. The donor community should also channel funds to local civil society organizations operating at the border areas who have deep understanding and trust of the Myanmar people. The international community must also support the Rohingya who are in limbo and provide them with resettlement opportunities. A second point here is that we need to see greater leadership. And due to ASEAN's continued failure to promote accountability, to progress its 5-point consensus, the international community must step up and stop depending on ASEAN to lead. We need to see greater action by the UN Security Council, by international bodies, as well as individual states, including ASEAN states. The 5-point consensus must no longer be the only blueprint for international engagement in Myanmar. The international community should also support the draft of the CSO working group on the Myanmar National Human Rights Commission reform on a new Union Human Rights Commission law. This follows the failure of the existing National Human Rights Commission to promote and protect the rights of the Myanmar people. There should also be another point. There should also be a more formal recognition of the national unity government. ASEAN and the international community must immediately recognize NUG as the legitimate government and representative of the people. We also call upon the South Korean government to continue to support the work of the NUG ambassador to South Korea, Ambassador Yan, who is here with us today, and refrain from engaging with the military junta. ASEAN in particular should not take any steps that could even be remotely construed as recognition or legitimization of the junta. When it comes to the topic of embargoes, we feel that the UN Security Council should impose a global arms embargo on the Myanmar military, with targeted sanctions against members of the military, its leadership, its affiliates, including business interests, to be able to curtail the ability of the junta and allies to buy weapons. We also need to see that sanctions are introduced on international companies who provide aviation support. For example, aviation fuel, insurance, and accreditation and certification services to end the airstrikes over in civilian populated ethnic areas. Indiscriminate bombings of civilian targets are violations of international law, constituting war crimes and crimes against humanity. Doesn't need to be said. Individual states, we feel, should also do more to cut off the military's access to financial resources. While as this would increase financial pressure on the junta, in particular by imposing sanctions on the military's gas and oil revenues, especially the Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise. We've also heard earlier from Ambassador Yan about multinational companies or companies operating, South Korean companies operating in Myanmar having a meeting. We further add that multinational corporations and businesses doing business in Myanmar must also ensure due diligence to ensure that their business activities and revenues do not benefit the junta. My final point is on accountability for crimes that have been committed by the military junta. The international community must ensure that justice and accountability for atrocities committed by the junta are a prerequisite to any peace-building efforts. I'd like to also reiterate a call that we've been making for several years now, that Myanmar should be referred to the ICC, the International Criminal Court. The international community must also urge the junta to allow independent media to report events vital to public interest without the fear of retaliation. I just want to, as Anselmo prompted at the beginning, I'd also like to thank Solomon for sharing the experience of Ethiopia. And I think that we can see there are commonalities when it comes to Myanmar and not just Myanmar, but I think when it comes to rising authoritarianism that we are seeing across Asia in many Asian countries, we can trace it back to a weaker education system. We can see erosion of certain cultures, and also the impact of colonialism and colonization that has led to so many of the conflicts that we have that we face today in our region of Asia as well. So in solidarity with you, Solomon and friends representing the African continent today. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll pass it back to Anselmo.
Okay, thank you very much, Shamini. I think you also mentioned about the several important international institutions which is not working well regarding the Myanmar situation. For instance, the UN, we have a European Union, we have a ICC, International Criminal Court. I think these are one of the key challenges to all the civil society and people's movement, how we can make them work according to their original mandate. Of course, we have a P5, these are powerful country, United States, UK, France, China, Russia. They have to move as a one, otherwise the Security Council cannot move, right? So this is a big challenge. All the civil society people in those 5 countries and at large. Okay, let's continue our discussion. So Kin Omar, so it's midnight. I hope you are still awake. Could you please share your view about this presentation and idea? You yourself has been engaged in the campaign, and then also you can share your own campaign as well. Okay, you have 7 to 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Anselmo. Thanks for having me here. I'm really glad that I'm able to join. Because the previous 2 speakers on Myanmar situation have already shared and updated in detail of the ground situation. I think what I'll do here is to share some of the reflections on where the things are that I see, and also sort of like what do we call it? Kind of update you in a way also like how the landscape at the moment that how it is. So the junta is waging an all-out war against the people, whereas the people are engaged in nationwide revolution. I think it's important to really get into understanding of the ground landscape and realities. The Myanmar is actually at the war at the nationwide level. It's no longer there, human rights violations by the military regime, not all, where we were kind of calling out about the violations of the freedom of expression or association. It passed way beyond of those already. Also, another important thing to note here is that people are not going to go back to the status quo before the February 2021 when the military launched their coup attempt. In fact, the people are determined to dismantle this military and end its impunity. And the military's coup attempt after 1 year has come to fail. So it is a failed coup already. Whereas the revolutionary forces are gaining the ground. Thousands of soldiers, military personnel, police personnel are defecting, not deserting. This is also the first time ever in this, the military might of Myanmar, the military institution that run or rule the country under their iron fist for 60 decades, are actually facing the first time ever crack within the institution. More and more soldiers, including from the Air Force, for example, are actually joining the people's movement. The junta is spreading really thin to all directions because the resistance is coming from all corners and they are clearly exhausted. The people have the political defiance movement. People also have the armed resistance movement or the revolution, the armed revolution. And with these 2 combined, Also, those of us from outside the country, the long-term activists, diaspora communities, as well as the solidarity networks across the world are lending their support, joining in the campaigns and pressure campaigns and advocacy work. So this military is actually, opening their this war, in all the frontiers. That's what I want to say. So in the response or the retaliation, what they are doing is they are doing what they know the best. That's the violence. And also they are doing this in a collective punishment. While the activists in detention, more than 9,000, are often subjected to extreme torture, where also women and LGBTIQ activists are facing sexual violence, the military is also committing crimes against humanity and war crimes. But also this military is so used to committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, the ethnic cleansing, that they have been carrying out for many decades against the ethnic and religious minority communities, including genocide against Rohingya in 2017, as Shamini already mentioned and spoke on it. But now they are committing the crimes against humanity and war crimes across the country, you see. The armed conflict or the armed attacks from the military on the people have increased more than like 700% over the past few months in particular. Just in February, last month alone, just in January 2022, the attacks, the armed clashes against the civilians, on the civilians, are more than 1,000 in 1 month. The Myanmar armed conflict already got to the close to or even greater than the Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. So that's where Myanmar is at the moment. And this skyrocket increase of the military attacks on the civilians is due largely to the fierce, deliberate attacks from the air, the airstrikes. So the military is really relying on the air because they know that the people on the ground don't have that military capacity to defend themselves. I mean, to counter them, or for the people on the ground to defend themselves from the airstrikes. So, but also I want to actually bring with you another positive side
Omar,
of.
can you
in
wind
spite
up
of
your
these,
intervention, please?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I will. Thank you. So, just my last point is, all of these the terrible things and violence are happening. There is a very bright side where I would like for you to see that Myanmar people have unprecedented unity and also presenting the unprecedented opportunity to move forward as a peaceful country because everybody come together. There is this collective vision for a federal democratic union. But I think at this point, when people are so determined and so strong, but I think the challenge that we are having, that you already heard from the previous two speakers, is there is lack of political will from the international community. Ideally, the Security Council adopting the resolution will be the best, the ideal situation that we will like to see for Myanmar to achieve peace. But we don't think that's going to happen. So what we want is for the individual governments and the people of the solidarity networks, their support, your support, basically. That's where Myanmar people are looking forward at this point. So I would just end here. Thanks, and Samuel, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kin Omar. I hope you continue to stay with us in spite of difficult time zone. Okay, with this one, we have not concluding, but we have stopped our discussion on Myanmar. Let's go to the Ethiopia. But before that, I'd like to remind you, you can put your question in the YouTube, those who are watching the session through YouTube. And also those who are in the room, you can also raise a question. I want to put in question first before so that Ambassador Yan Nai-Tung can prepare answer. As many speakers said, we have many things we can do, internationally. One is recognition of energy government, but at the moment only France and South Korea and no other Asian countries, right? So how can you work together to put our pressure on our own government in Asia, particularly our neighboring country? It can be Japan, it can be Thailand, ASEAN, recognize energy as legitimate government. This is, I think, important diplomatic effort. At the same time, embargo, the company's economic sanction. So I want to ask later on, so when you make a concluding remark or answer to the question, please include this question to you. Okay, let's go to Ethiopia. Now, let me invite Emmanuel Kusei Anning. He's from the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. You have over 7 or 8 minutes to respond to Dr. Solomon's presentation. Please.
Yes, thank you very much. And let me say a very big thank you for the invitation. First and foremost, I want to thank Solomon for creating a broad framework within which we can respond to some of the challenges, but certainly also the options for response to some of the problems that he has raised. So let me very quickly make a prefatory remark. First, that both Ethiopia and Myanmar, holds a lot of promise, irrespective of the challenges. And what we've heard this morning gives a clear indication of the drive by civil society, community forces, and this burning human desire for a right to speak and for a right to be included in how they are governed. Nevertheless, the story of Myanmar and Ethiopia tells also a story of the crisis of democracy, of how to ensure that forms of governance, respect for human rights, the rule of law, strengthening institutions, and delivering public service goods in a manner that people feel included in how their governments perform and how these governments listen to them is very crucial and critical. Two other components are key, not so much in terms of their correlation between the two countries, but across other areas. And I think Anselmo's point about the comparisons between Myanmar and Ethiopia as lessons for prevention in these difficult times occurring elsewhere is key. One relates to the excessive availability and use of small arms and light weapons that have infiltrated ordinary communities to such an extent that dialogue has been undermined and the resort to weapons as conflict resolution tools, unfortunately so, has become the norm of the day. Another point that I think we need to look at very carefully relates to how these acts of violence, either by states or non-state actors, and I think Solomon mentioned non-state actors, fund their activities. The exploitation of natural resources, the use of narcotics, to fund actions of resistance against those who seek to oppress others. So when we talk about the cases of Myanmar and Ethiopia, I want to bring in one other theme that possibly is not so much related to to Ethiopia, but to Myanmar and lots of other countries where there are tensions. One is the issue of statehood. The very idea of how the state is, who it represents, its manifestations and characterizations, and the way in which the citizens relate to and owe allegiance to this idea of the state. And therein lies some of the tensions and contradictions that Solomon earlier on mentioned. The nexus between the center and the periphery. And we are seeing across this continent, the African continent, the difficulties of governments in extending their reach of influence to the far-flung areas of their states and getting members of those states to owe them or to show levels of allegiance. And that contestation relating to power, to influence, to inclusion, when it fails to work, creates a vacuum within which, unfortunately, the military sometimes seeks to step in. So when I talk about the crisis of democracy, in the case of Myanmar, but also in the case of the continent, in Africa, there are two divergent dynamics. One is what we are seeing in Sudan, similar to what is going on in Myanmar, an unwillingness and a resistance by the communities and societies to say, no, we will not accept the military taking over power. Unfortunately, in the Sahel and in West Africa, the crisis of democracy has been embedded through corruption, exclusion, abuse, that the entry of the military into the political space is actually glorified. So we've seen this in Guinea, in Mali, and in Burkina Faso, and a failed attempt in Guinea-Bissau, and across the Sahel and West Africa. Democracy is so much in crisis that the military looks like an acceptable option. Unfortunately, that is not so. So we need to change the narrative somehow. But how do we do so? And herein, I want to focus on three things. One is the role of civil societies and international solidarity. Civil societies are critical actors, first in norm development and embedding norms. How do we ensure that the ideas around the rule of law, the respect for human rights, of inclusion, of holding public office holders accountable to discharge and deliver the services for which we have entrusted them with our lives? So civil society as networks of epistemic communities that have knowledge are key in ensuring that we build this international solidarity. The second point relates to Solomon's point about African peace and security architecture. And here, probably, I think Shamini mentioned it tangentially, if I got it right, and also to ECOWAS. The inconsistent application of the norms and values and principles to which states have voluntarily signed on to. So in the African case, we see how the African Union and its regional economic community sometimes apply the principles relating to democracy, and when they are infringed upon in ways that are not consistent. And that inconsistency creates a space within which those who do not want to embed and strengthen democracy get the opportunity to then work. But I think Anselmo's point and the conversations this morning, or at least very early morning for me, points to the need for international solidarity. And Mini, I like your point about the Rohingyas. Solomon knows this and Paul knows this, that in most African countries, precisely because our societies are diverse, minority groups almost never have the chance to voice their concerns. And when their concerns are voiced, they are almost always dismissed. And herein lies the possibility and the need for an international solidarity that says we, across regions, across countries, across time zones, will fight as civil society to ensure that we can embed these norms. But then how does civil society do that? And I always tell my students that civil society's strength lies in its willingness to share its values through public engagement, radio, and here I'm talking particularly about community radio, using local languages and words in a manner that our fishermen, our farmers, our ordinary people will say, wow, so these things do matter to me. That as a simple, ordinary person, I can also make an impact. That one of the challenges that civil society faces across board has been its inability to couch the principles that we believe in and to locate them within the communities and the people that we want to carry them along with us. So there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of solidarity. But we need a new discourse that is more encompassing, that is more dialogic, that is more consensual, and that gives hope to those who feel that democracy haven't brought the fruits that they are looking for. Okay. So when we speak in a manner that is clear, that sometimes gives a sense of pessimism. Located within that pessimism is the hope that international solidarity, driven by shared norms, driven by shared values, driven by shared principles, is possible. And that it can be possible if we use a language and a presentation that allows ordinary people to have a buy-in and to identify themselves within the words and the discourses that we are bringing to them. For me, from Shamini's point and from Solomon's point, that we have a basis to work together. We have a message that is clear. We have a message that gives hope. So I want to leave my introductory comments here, and I want to thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Let's give a big hands to Sway Kwei Ami. I think it was a very good analytical comment, not only Ethiopia, but also Myanmar. I think this is really great. I think I really agree to what you said, crisis of democracy, more specifically federalism, more specifically how to deal with the minorities, includes democracy. This is the root cause of the old armed conflict, both in Ethiopia and also Myanmar, and also many other countries. Armed conflict is a consequence of the failure of democracy we live today. So let's continue our discussion. We have one more discussion from Kenya, because Dr. Aning spoke from Ghana, West Africa. Now we move to the East Africa, Kenya. Paul, you have all 7 minutes to share your wisdom and insight. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will, after listening to an elder like Kwesi and Solomon, I think I just need to take only 3 minutes. They have articulated it very well. And Kwesi, I wish that I was actually taking all those notes to come and say, this is what civil society needs to start doing from now, and it's very interesting because just 2 days ago we ended a meeting on Ethiopia. Several of us from across the continent came together, and one of the things that we were concluding amongst ourselves is the statement that Kwesi has raised, and that is, while we are very good as civil society in speaking to ourselves, we are not very good at speaking to our communities. The ability for us to take our language and our passion and all our call and use it to mobilize the community, to make the farmers, to make the fishermen, and to make them feel that they're also part of the movement is something that I feel we need to keep on learning lessons, and I think we need to find out which options we can manage. I think it's listening to everybody else, and one of the things of being the last speaker is that you don't need to have a presentation. You can just take everybody's summary and then make it yours you know, this is whatever. I think, first of all, let me begin by thanking young Naing. I mean, listening to what he has gone through and listening whatever to the challenges and how he's trying to mobilize. I think, young Naing, I really want to appreciate the work that you are doing. If I was Indian, I will tell you Namaste. I don't know whether that is how it is said all over Asia. But then when I listen to Kinomar and I listen to Shamini, and the fact that right now you can't be in your country, you know, I mean, it's easy speaking right now because I am in Kenya. If things go wrong, I have got a sitter somewhere I can call. I've got an uncle I can call somewhere and whatever. But when you have to be in a foreign country, I can tell you it's never the same. It's never the same. You always want to feel that there's a way in which things can be resolved back home, so that we can also go home. So I really want to appreciate the effort that you are making, Shamini, the effort that you are making, Kinomar, and I really hope that one day you will be speaking from your homeland. I really would have said so. I think just listening to what is happening, I sense three things, and I am hoping that Anselmo, that we will somehow look at this as not just what has happened within this context of conference, but see how to manage it. First of all, when I listen to all of us, I can see that all our differences and our conflicts are rooted in very, very strong historical context. And sometimes I think when we are dealing with conflicts, it is easy to focus on what is happening right now and forget that there is a very long history to it. And sometimes we just need to take a wide lens and look back. So if you look at what has happened in Myanmar, for a long time when I was growing up, we used to call it Burma. Whatever that is the name that we knew. You can see you've got a military coup in 62, a military coup in 88, you've got a military coup last year, and you can imagine how exhausting is it for citizens that for 73 years they have never witnessed peace. I don't know if we can imagine what it feels to the minds and the emotions of people, if for 73 years you are constantly trying to just live in peace because of that kind of issue. And I think we need to look at it. Now, if you look at Ethiopia, it is easy for those of us who are reading right now to say, oh, you know, in November 2020 or whatever, this and this happened. But many of us forget that actually Ethiopia is one of the oldest empires on the African continent. And sometimes we think that we can address whatever the issues in Ethiopia from what happened whatever the other day, but no, we have got to go back to the issues that happened in the 70s, the issue that happened in the 60s, which now leads me to a very interesting second point. And that, unfortunately, is a very sad one. For those of us who have got an opportunity, there is a documentary on Nelson Mandela, which I would recommend to all of us. It is called Mandela, Father of a Nation. And okay, I'll get the correct title. And one of the things that Mandela discusses as a personal reflection is that if you look at all our conflicts, somehow there is some European hand somewhere. You know, when you look at what is happening, whether it is in Africa, whether it is in Asia, whether it is in the Pacific, whether it is in the Caribbean, somewhere the British will show up, somewhere the Germans will show up, somewhere the Russians will show up. And I'm just asking ourselves, maybe it is time to ask a very interesting question. What is it about Europe that makes them insert themselves in every single conflict in the world? I mean, they have got a continent of their own, but you go to Burma and you can see the divide and rule. You come to Ethiopia and you've got the Italians, and you come and you have the Russians, and you've got our friends. I'm asking ourselves, maybe we need to. Maybe next time we need to bring our European colleagues and ask them what makes them so restless. that they really cannot settle on their own continent and allow us to try and build our own regions in peace. I know some of us may not be happy with that kind of statement, but it bothers me that every time you go to conflict, there's somewhere some European interest. Even right now, we are talking about the junta, but nobody is asking about where they are getting the weapons and who is selling them the weapons. How can they manage to get such strong, powerful weapons? Weapons are not manufactured in Myanmar. I am not aware of any weapons being manufactured in Ethiopia. I am not aware of any African country that manufactures the kind of weapons that I see being used by either it is the states or the people or whatever, or the rebels or the juntas. And these are things that we need to ask ourselves. And then the other thing that I'm beginning to ask ourselves is, what happened to the social contract? I listened to Myanmar, and I can see several attempts at getting a constitution.
Can you please wind up your intervention, please? Already time's up.
Yes, exactly. So I am asking ourselves, how do we make sure that we get our social contract right? Because we are talking about the constitutions, I'm talking about democracy, and talking about our nationhood. And maybe what we need to do as a civil society is to ask ourselves, can we help our communities to develop a path for rebuilding the social contract so that we are able to deal with our ethnic diversities? If I was to propose 3 specific steps that maybe we need to think of from here collectively. Number 1 is we need to find ways to stop the state killings. What is making me sad right now is that we are having countries where the states are bombing its own citizens. This is not right. We have to find ways in which we can tell the state, you cannot use your military might for you to bomb your fellow citizens. The second thing that I just want to ask is, let us find ways in which we can use our ethnic diversity as a form of rebuilding our social contracts as a community. Whichever way we can do that, I know that there are very many different ways, and how we can do it on the African continent may not be similar to how we can do it, but if we can focus on rebuilding the social contract, then we can go to the third thing which I'm talking about, and that is issues of equity, justice, and the global power can only be handled if we can manage the social contracts and deal with our own diversity. Justice, equity, international dimensions, whether it is interest in the resources that these regions have. If as civil society we can take a leading role in rebuilding the social contract then we are able to close avenues for the international players to come and take advantage of the conflicts that exist in our own countries. I think I'll leave it there, Anselmo. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Once again, let's give a big hand to Paul. Again, very analytical comment. I think also very important, you mentioned about so-called colonial legacy, historical root of this conflict, because many of from the Ethiopia and Myanmar, and also even South Korea, we were once the colony, of course South Korea is now Western, but many developing countries were former colony of European countries. This is one of the historical causes of today's conflict. That has to be taken into account when you analyze, when you build the international solidarity. That's why exactly one of the reasons that we build the solidarity between Asia, Africa directly, so we can learn from each other directly, with the fresh eyes, without colonial legacy. So thank you for your enlightenment. And time's almost up, unfortunately. We have only 5 minutes left, but I see the one participant from Ethiopia in the room. Could you please say one small, because you are in PyeongChang, you learn about PyeongChang. Would you like to say a few words about your own experience? Can you give the mic, please? Please, she's the student in South Korea. That's why she was able to attend this forum. Please stand up and then say.
Okay, thank you. My name is Salamait. I'm from Ethiopia. The war which is going on now is, I think it's getting better in this month. There is a sign of the 2 parties. Maybe they can sit to the negotiation and maybe they can brought some agreements. I don't know the potential. I don't want to say more things about this issue. I'm so concerned about the people because the issue is not about the people. The actors are not the people. The war is between the former and the previous one, the previous government. So maybe for the sake of the people, maybe they will bring some solutions for this problem.
Okay, thank you very much
thank
for your
you.
comment. I hope while you are in Korea, you can learn more about how we can address those issues. Not only the Ethiopia is a common, in Korea we have not an ethnic conflict, but it's a national, the conflict, between North and South Korea. Okay, thank you very much for your input. Let me invite Solomon to give your response. It's a final and closing remark. Then the Ambassador Yan. Solomon, Dr. Solomon, you have 2 or 3 minutes to respond to some of the comments.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, 2 things I would like to say. The first one is what Paul mentioned about this European and African partnership. As you remember, last week there was an African Union and the European Union EU forum where they tried to negotiate things. And actually, the international community has issued a statement that partnership has to be based on through interdependence. That understanding it has to be built on the understanding that the humanity is one, that the well-being of one is dependent on the other, that Europe cannot experience well-being unless Africa experiences it. So I encourage everyone to read. It is available online on our website, bic.org, to read the statement that how the oneness of the understanding of this principle helps the relationship of the two. And the other one is what my friend Salamawit suggested. Yes, basically it's like when the two elephants fight. It is the grass that's the first in most cases. So ultimately, it is the people, the citizens who are suffering out of violence, out of all the manifestations of violence, and also the high rise of living cost. People are really suffering. So at least for the sake of the people, so that they get quietude, the warring faction have to come into agreement. That's what I can say. And thank you, Anselmo, for bringing this into fruition, and all the participants and all the respondents. I really appreciate all the interventions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Solomon. So let's go to Ambassador Yan Naitung. You have also 2 minutes to respond to the questions.
Okay. ကျွန်တော်မာလိုပဲပြောပါမယ်ပြီးရင်သူအင်္ဂလိပ်လိုဘာသာပြန်ပြပါမယ်ကျွန်တော်အနေနဲ့အခုလိုဒီလိုပွဲမျိုးကိုစီစဉ်ပေးတဲ့အတွက်ဖြောင်ချမ်းငင်းချမ်းရေးဖွဲ့ကိုလည်းကျေးဇူးအများကြီးတင်ပါတယ်တောင်းတကိုလည်းကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီလိုပွဲမျိုးတွေဆက်ဆက်မပြတ်တင်ပြပြုလုပ်ပေးနိုင်ပါစေလို့ဆုတောင်းပါတယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဆရာနာရှင်တွေရဲ့လောက်မှနေရတဲ့ပြည်သူပြည်သားတွေရဲ့ဘဝမငြင်းချမ်းသောနိုင်ငံတွေရဲ့အခြေအနေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့မှတ်သားစရာလေးလာစရာတွေအများကြီးရရှိတဲ့အတွက်အများကြီးကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်ခင်ဗျာ
네, 이렇게 성주한 자리로.
Thank you for inviting me to this significant event. I would like to thank the PyeongChang Peace Forum organizers, and through this forum, I do believe that we were able to learn about solutions, and also were able to hear some valuable insights. I do hope that in the future, you can provide this kind of a platform. Thank you.
Before you end, I'd like to suggest to have a group photo with a sign of solidarity for people fighting against military junta in Myanmar. These are 3 fingers. Can you show your 3 fingers? But it's not only Myanmar now, it's Ethiopia, all over the world. 3 fingers. Okay? Kwesi, Shamini, 3 fingers, please. 1. Shamini, 3 fingers. 2 hands up. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much. So this is the end of the session. Thank you for your participation. Okay, hope to see you. Let's keep in touch with the spirit of solidarity. Thank you.